Hi, everybody. I'm Candid Stanisci of NLL Lacrosse Talk. Welcome to the Spanglish Worlds Networks on Zingo TV Channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now on Lacrosse Talk, our co-host Gary Groob, and two very special guests, Bob Tearing, coach of the Loyola High School, and Marc Riccio, CEO of USA Lacrosse. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Glad to see you here.
Well, thank you very much. Great to be here.
Thank you, Frank.
Bob, one of our favorite questions to start with, we always like to know the history of your involvement in lacrosse. So, Bob, I'll start with you. Tell us how you started in lacrosse.
Fourth grade, I got handed a stick. I went to a school called St. Paul's in Baltimore, which has a history going back, 75, 80 years. And from that point on, I had a stick in my hand all the way through high school, college, club, and I started coaching, which was my passion, 1971. And I've been coaching except for a couple of years ever since. So, and I've been involved in so many different phases of lacrosse. Coached at every level from Pee Wee all the way up to pro. So that's a synopsis.
You've confirmed what we've learned over and over again. It's once you get started in lacrosse, you never leave. It becomes a very important and central part of your life. Thank you for doing this. And of course, Mr. Riccio, you're the CEO of USA Lacrosse. I'm going to ask you, when did you pick up the stick, and if you did, and why?
Sure. So I picked up a stick. It was right around seventh grade, as a matter of fact. So I'm originally from Western New York, a small town in the Finger Lakes region, a place called Canandaigua, New York, and had a new neighbor moved in next door. They had an extra stick and were lacrosse players, and picked up an extra one laying on the ground. I still remember it was an orange STX Sam head, for those who are old enough to remember those sticks.
I do remember those.
Oh yeah, I picked it up, started playing, and I never looked back. And
well, so I guess the first question to ask you, gentlemen, what do you think is the biggest change that we have to look forward to in lacrosse in your mind? What, moving up a little bit, and what's the next step that's important from your perspectives? Bob, you first.
Actually, Marc has his finger on that. And I'm going to ask him to explain it at some point. The growth of the game is becoming exponential. The women's game, men's game, international, we're a big player in the international stage now, which I'm going to ask Marc about later. And I just see continued growth, and it's more accessible, a little easier to get involved. The programs that Marc's organization's doing are spreading sticks in the game everywhere. So I see exponential growth over the years.
How about you, Marc, from the elevated view?
Well, growth is a big part of our mandate, and we're about to launch a new long-range plan sometime next month that will specifically put a stake in the ground around growth and actionable plans around that continued endeavor. And working with a lot of other folks to do it. We can't do it by ourselves as the governing body in the U.S. It's going to take a lot of other people and support to do that, and we've got some plans to do that. But really, I think the next big thing in lacrosse is actually sixes. Sixes, as the Olympic discipline, was designed to help developing nations adopt the game or start playing the game. And, with smaller sides, for those who don't know, 6-on-6, smaller field size. You need less athletes to field competitive teams, lowers the barrier of entrance. But what we're finding is the introduction of this discipline is having profound effects at the youth level because it's intuitive. When you watch it, you just get it, right? People are running back and forth. And for young players, just like box, the more touches you have, the more fun you have. It's better utilization of field space. Young kids can play at mixed gender without equipment at a young age and run up and down the field. And in an hour, they're gassed and they've touched the ball a whole bunch of times and they've had a great experience. And it's the key to this is that the discipline was created really around international and developing nations. Locally, it's gaining traction as a tool to put kids on a field when maybe that community can't put as many teams together or a few teams, or you're in the Northeast and it's cold and you need to be in a gym and you need to be in a parking lot. Like I grew up playing out a parking lot. And so it's happening organically. And sixes becomes an entree into the field game and the box game.
And it's easier to find patches of grass than it is in indoor arenas or even outdoor arenas for that matter.
Yeah. So I think
it's also more fan friendly, isn't it?
It's very
much more.
We're finding it very fan friendly in the sense it's intuitive. If you find a person who doesn't know lacrosse and they walk up to a field or they tune in and they see it, they naturally get it. The field game, you got people that don't cross certain lines. You've got some things that maybe to the novice or the casual fan doesn't intuitively connect. And that's what's interesting about sixes is that it is, and it's on a smaller field, which makes it more compact from a viewing experience. The game runs faster. There's no face-off. You pick up and you go. And so, admittedly, from a viewership and engagement standpoint, there's a lot of pluses to it.
Yeah, there isn't the peripheral challenge that there is on a bigger field.
Correct. Yeah. Watching a lacrosse game on a men's or women's field game is fantastic, right? And sixes is not going to replace the field game or replace box. It's not the point. But there's a bit more ground to cover. There's certainly a bit more from a visual experience on a field that has its challenges, where sixes is a much more condensed viewing experience.
So we're going to try something. Okay, Gary, go ahead. No, say what you're going to say, and then we'll.
Okay. If it gets it into the Olympics, then it's worthwhile, too, because it's going to get how many more countries and how many more eyes to watch it.
Yes. If it gets in, well, what's happened is like small-sided play is really a best practice in youth sport. So if you look at what hockey has done, hockey well, like they have small-sided play. That's been part of their growth trajectory, which has been really good. You look at some of the basics of basketball. When you start playing basketball, the rim is lowered. You're on a smaller. You're not playing full court as a young kid. Mm-hmm. Baseball here in the States, like you have 60-foot bases before you go to the 90-foot bases. And so lacrosse, like, why is a 10-year-old standing out on a full field? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So small-sided play is just kind of natural. It happens in other sports. And the fact that you've got now an international discipline, meaning the sixes was held at the World Games and then potentially the Olympics, it legitimizes that small backyard pick up and play, small-sided play, because there's an international high-performance component that's out there that makes it a little more legitimate, if you will.
Sure. Okay, before we hand it over to Bob, I just want to explain the way we do this show. It's a little different than normal. Bob's going to ask some questions of Mr. Riccio, and so once Gary, what you want to say now, and then we're going to be kind of the fly on the wall. We're going to get inside the game from a perspective from the coach to the CEO. Sorry.
Sounds great.
No, I'm looking forward to what Bob has to ask, because I'm sure he's going to cover anything that I have in my notes as well. So, Bob, it's over to you.
Well, Gary, I would like you've done your research, and I have too, give a little bit of Marc's background. I mean, he brings something to the organization that has never been there before. We went from a very small little foundation back in the late 70s to this worldwide organization that affects the game in the world. So give them a little bit of background if you have it there.
Sure. Of course. All-American at Candid Academy, the first one ever to be an All-American out of that high school, which to me is astounding, especially in Western New York, which has got so much lacrosse going on. I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about the program there and the coaches and how it got you moving forward, because eventually going to Hofstra.
So I still call Canandaigua home. It's how much it means to me. So on my wall here, I have a picture of the lake. And actually, this is Canandaigua's, CA proud. Like it still rides with me. So it means a great deal to me. When I got this job, the two people I called first, other than my mother, were my college coach, John Danowski, who's Duke's coach, and he was my coach at Hofstra, and my high school coach, to thank them for everything that they did for me and for so many others in terms of providing an opportunity. So, Canandaigua for me, as I said, is home. It's foundational. I still communicate with folks back there, including the current head coach there. And they've done a phenomenal job in terms of building not only a men's program, boys program, but a girls program. And regrettably, I date myself a bit. The girls program hadn't even started yet when I was there. And I certainly follow along. But as we all know, like youth sports, high school sports is so foundational to the development of a young person. And for me, I'm very grateful that community supported me. We didn't come from money. We were always kind of struggling to keep our head above water. And lacrosse and that community provided me with things that I otherwise would not have been able to experience. My first plane flight, for example, was I went to go down and play at the North-South high school game down here at Hopkins, the high school game. We couldn't really afford the plane ticket. The local booster club put money together to pay for me to go and experience that. And so it's just that simple act of support and community, infrastructure that is so crucial. And so, Canandaigua will always be home. My brother's still there. My mom's still there. And like I said, friends are still
right. So when you go to Hofstra, you actually go there as a goalie.
Yes.
Let's talk about that. And then you switched over to attack in your last year. But your numbers were good, 161 save, 9.67 goals against. You had good numbers as a goaltender. What had you switch?
So, well, in high school, I actually played man up. I'd come out of the goal, hand over my goalie stick, grab the attack stick, and I'd play at the point for man up. So I played in the field. In the summer, we'd go down to Geneva where Hobart is, and they had a box facility there. I'd play box all summer as a field player. I'd never play in the cage. And so I'd spend a lot of time outside of the cage. What happened in the goal at Hofstra is I'm starting my freshman year, playing most of my sophomore year, but a new guy came in, Dave Giannone, who's a very good goalie. And I saw the writing on the wall. I'm like, I'm not so sure I'm going to see, he's an excellent goaltender. I think he has a save percentage record or a top at Hofstra. And so I talked to Dino, Coach Danowski, and I'm like, he knew I'd played outside of the goal. I said, I'd like to give it a go outside of the cage. I think I'm going to see the field more. And so I was going to do that. But between my sophomore and junior year, I actually blew out my knee in summer ball, ACL blowout. So I had to redshirt my junior year, and the other goalie stepped in, had a phenomenal year. And the writing was on the wall. So I had moved to attack at that moment in time, as part of just trying to make sure that I got on the field and played.
Right. So you graduate out of Hofstra with a degree in communications, and you use it right away getting in with the Jets, being in the same area. I guess that's where they had their job fair, whatever, to get you in. And you spent 17 years with the Jets.
Yes. So the good part of that, what also happened is because I blew out my knee and went on to graduate school to get my 5th year of eligibility, go to grad school, I'd actually spent a couple of years right after I finished lacrosse working at Hofstra, working in communications, marketing, and fundraising for athletics. So I'd got some really good fundraising experience, understood how collegiate athletics worked at a mid-major university. But in that process, as to your point, I had gotten to know the folks at the Jets because the Jets office and training camps were on the campus of Hofstra. So that did parlay into, they were looking, I knew some people, they knew me. This wasn't like a job that was posted. It was just right place, right time. And I was fortunate enough to spend 17 seasons at the Jets and went from being a very small, small in terms of revenue generation, lower quartile revenue generating team to a top quartile team, built a new stadium, new training facility. And we went from, pretty much small operation to a much bigger, higher revenue, functioning group. And I was very fortunate to work with some great people and do some good things along the way.
Right. And you parlayed that into your own consulting business, guiding global esports and video games and other things like that.
Yeah, it's been a great run. I mean, during my time at Hofstra, And then at the Jets, I actually got my MBA at night and my law degree at night. And that was a great experience because, they became competitive differentiators along the way. And when you do that, it puts you in a position to maybe know some things, learn some things, have some experiences you might not have otherwise. And that allowed me to be in a position to open up my own consultancy after I left the Jets. I worked for a startup that we rolled into a small event company, sold that event company to a larger global agency, then worked in the global agency and really understanding not only domestic U.S. sport, but also European, Asian, African. And that just opened up a whole new world of understanding the sport and entertainment and media landscape beyond just the U.S. And so it was all because it started with lacrosse, being at Hofstra, and those experiences along the way took me on my path.
That must have been really interesting because it sounds like you've adopted methods on the way, and all of them, I assume, help you in the position as CEO.
Yes. What was interesting about when this job opened up, this job, has some core elements to it. One is certainly a belief in youth sport and the mission of youth sport. And, from my background, I believe very strongly in that because of what it provided me and so many of my friends. You need to have some fundraising experience. You need to have some commercial, meaning sponsorship, advertising, media, marketing experience, media and entertainment, which I had particularly through my time at the Jets. But you also have to have some high performance. You're fielding national teams here. We have 12 national team programs. And so working in the NFL and then working at an agency, I was around, PGA Tour golf to Premier League, as well as in the NFL. You see how coaches and I became a student of watching great coaches like a Bill Parcells and how they lead and how they operate. And that experience has enabled me to manage national team expectation and goals and desires, everything from what our facility looks like, having built a facility in the NFL, to what it means to go out and the value of mission-based coaching in communities and the impact it can have, right? And they're opposite ends of that pyramid. But all of those experiences rather put me in position to, I think, I know it sounds a bit cliche, but be kind of a good fit, almost perfect fit for the role at this moment in time.
I've heard this before from another sports leader. You understand, you can feel and see the way it's supposed to look like. It's great to enter into the work environment, but experiencing specific issues helps make them clearer and be able to work on them and adapt them to what your situation is.
Yes. And I'll give you an example how that comes to life. We're having this discussion right now. The men's national team will play at the World Lacrosse Men's World Championships this summer in San Diego. And so we're in discussions about, okay, this event is happening. It's a world championship. We have our men's national team, 23 phenomenal athletes, but they've got a job to do. It's to win a gold medal. And they're here for, a 15-day span of time, but it's a great opportunity from sponsorship, membership, philanthropy to drive our business and our brand. How can we use those athletes to drive our business and mission outcomes, yet not distract them from what they need to be doing as their primary mandate, which is compete? And how do you manage recovery, training, rest? But yet they do have a responsibility to advance the mission and help us do what we need to do on the fundraising and sponsorship and other part. My experience in the NFL is very similar to that. You have athletes, their job is to win on Sunday. But the reality is the rest of the organization needs to support that, and we've got to sell tickets and we've got to sell sponsorship. And what does that balance look like? And ensuring there's communication, there's clarity, there's expectations, the coaches are comfortable, with process, et cetera. So that's happened in my time in the NFL that is coming to life right now at this moment. And it was the same thing with the women's team last summer competing for the Women's World Championship. Very similar discipline and understanding that you've got to think through.
Along the same line, just in the early years of this organization, the Lacrosse Foundation, we would have had to look for 3 board members to fill the roles that Marc fills, because you look for your board to contribute. You need legal help, you need financial, you need marketing. And so we would look for board members that would do that. Marc walks into the job with all of those bases covered. Yeah.
Well, you took over USA Lacrosse at an unprecedented time, just coming out of COVID. So you had another little thing to worry about is how do you get people back to normalcy? How do you get people back into the seats? How do you get people back to play? So it was a whole new set of problems that we've never had to deal with before.
Yeah. So the first thing I'm going to do is give props to my predecessor, Steve Sanderson. Steve was in this seat for 25 plus years. And I was literally having this conversation with someone internally just about, certain processes with which he needed to manage through. And I had said to one of my colleagues here, I'm like, I don't know how he did this. Like, his level of patience and professionalism is beyond me in terms of how he advanced this organization. And then someone said, he's this, he's that. And I said, well, that's why he's in the Hall of Fame, right? Like, because he was able to do it. And so that's the first thing is I walked into an organization that there was a professional, peaceful transition of leadership. Steve was there as a resource throughout the transition process. And so me stepping into the role at the time that you're referencing is quite frankly more of an opportunity and than anything, in that, yes, the organization needed to adjust coming out of COVID. Yes, the organization was coming to an end of a previous long-range plan that Steve had put in place that would end in 2023. And so, my mandate was bring us out of COVID, if you will, reestablish a new long-range plan, and what is that, and go. But the interesting opportunity here that COVID created is a couple things. One is that COVID created a license for everybody to make more bold decisions than they would have before. You get a higher latitude for risk tolerance because everybody recognized that COVID accelerated the changes that were already taking place. And so that gave me and gives us latitude to be a bit more bold, to take a bit more risk than we might have before. The second thing that COVID did is that people in the lacrosse community, and every sports and entertainment community for that matter, had all of their weaknesses exposed. In that, coming out of it, the idea of working together sounds far more appealing than being independent. Being independent might not be such a great place to be, as Warren Buffett would say, when the tide goes out, you see who has the shorts down, kind of a thing. Like, when the tide goes out and it's more challenging, being independent and doing your own thing might not be the most safest place. And so we've been able to have conversations with people in the lacrosse community about how to work together around sport growth in particular. That's our one common opportunity, is growth, particularly at the youth level. That open dialogue has happened in a way that I don't think would have happened pre-COVID. And so it's provided a unique opportunity to take a bit of risk and to have an open discussion from folks that might not have been as welcoming or open prior to COVID.
I think you had an advantage others didn't have because of the horizontal view you had, of horizontal and vertical, of how the business works.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that it's been my advantage is I know the game. And so I've got a bit of credibility because I did play at the high school and collegiate level. And I know some folks like, John Danowski and a few other folks. But as I said to the board during my interview process, I said, if you want a lacrosse insider, I'm regrettably, I'm not your guy. I'm not your person. And the response to it is, no, we don't necessarily want a lacrosse insider. You need to, have some creds, and you need to be able to communicate with folks and understand the nuances. But so that, to your point, I had a very good view of sports and entertainment in the U.S. I had a pretty good understanding of how an organization could and should run and integrate, but I was not so ingrained that I had predispositions or biases that would hold me back from having an open mind on certain things. And so I have been able to look at things and say, why are we doing that? Is this part of the solution or part of the problem? And let's make sure that it's part of the solution.
You remind me a lot of another former guest of ours, Rich Lisk, who's, of course, out on Long Island now with the New York Riptide. Your theory is the same: chemistry beats strategy. where his is build a team with character, not characters, as well as the same idea of, is this a solution or is it the problem? The same kind of mindset as him, which is in good company, I would say.
Yeah, I haven't met Rich yet. I think we're connected on LinkedIn, and I've heard his name chatted about a bit. But he's right. Those are I think the absolute right approaches. And combined with, I'm a big believer in rising tide raises all boats, and sometimes that's hard for people. They say it, but actually executing against that can be hard. But if everybody in our world focuses on supporting more kids playing lacrosse, not just getting a stick in their hand, but keeping it in their hand, there's retention, sustainability, the better we all are off for it. As a sport, the better our communities are, for that matter. But the better we are, in that when I get folks in a room together about how we focus on, growth, we don't talk about problems. Like, this isn't about what your problems are, because the problems might be similar, but they might be different. This is about what our one common opportunity is and how we come together to work on that common opportunity. People respond better to the common opportunity than they do to the problem.
So in other words, throw the solution out there before anybody even has to say the problem.
Correct.
Well, hitting that idea of grassroots, though, one of the things that keeps coming up when we're talking to guys who are running the programs is, yes, it's getting stronger lacrosse all the way across the board from the club level up. We put a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of programs for the guys who are going to go try and make it to the PLL, to the NLL, to that. But the grassroots level is still a bit of a problem. And trying to get the kids who aren't going to be your next Jeff Teat or your next, Casey Powell, but the ones who want to play for fun and want to just be part of that team. That's where it seems to be a bigger problem with programming, funding, all the way across. It's in Canada as well as in the U.S.
Right. So, yes, you're right. And here's some of our approaches to that. The first thing I'll say is, particularly in the U.S., we've got a youth sports in America problem with a pay-for-play model. And that is, if you got resources and you can afford to go to a club, great. But if you don't have resources, you go to a community program. But if you don't have a community program, then you got nothing. And so that's a youth sport in America problem. And I know this from my own time working in global. Like, that's not a European problem. It's a U.S. problem. And it's not just lacrosse. It's basketball. It's baseball. It's volleyball. It's field hockey. It's across every sport. And so that's the first thing, is that I don't want to single ourselves out as this issue. It's all of our issue, for that matter. With that said, one of the challenges is club and communities organizations. Sometimes there's this perceived riff, the club stepping on the community programs. That's more false narrative than reality. Every club I talk to says the same thing. Like, sometimes I got to turn kids away. Like, I don't have enough kids, or maybe the kid's not good enough, but I can only field so many teams. And so no club likes turning away kids. No, but they do, because there is a capacity for them. And so I have started to meet clubs on this level of, and everybody in the ecosystem, for that matter, the pro leagues as well. You all have investors, and those investors are whether they're real investors or your players and your parents, as examples. And the only way to get a return on that investment is to grow your enterprise value. The only way to grow your enterprise value is grow your audience. That's where we can come in. We can help grow that audience together. Mm-hmm. And if you approach it from the standpoint, from a club who is running their business, the more robust a community program is where that club exists, the better off that club has to thrive. It's like common sense. And so every club has said to me, like, I don't want community to go away. I want a robust community program because I want more players. Because if some of those matriculate on to our club, awesome. That's good for us. It's good, right? Mm-hmm. And this is where Sixes comes in. Sixes is becoming that natural outlet for that kid who doesn't make the team on the club, but yet still wants to play. I can go play in a semi-structured sixes league with my friends at the community group, 2 or 3 times a week after school, and sixes is still legitimate and I still get to play. So that's where we're finding organically sixes getting traction is new players, but that player who didn't make the team and who would normally churn out. The key starts to be is how does that community group have a leader, a coach, basically a leader, and that really is the coach. And the coach is the person that does the dirty work, right? We're not all here because without coaches. And so the coach is getting the field space, they're recruiting the players, they're dealing with the insurance, they're setting up the practices. And oh yeah, by the way, then they're coaching. But and particularly the coach needs to come from within a community. For a program to be sustainable, that coach, that leader needs to come from a community. So for a white guy to go into a community of color and say, here, I'm helped start lacrosse, that can be helpful. But to be sustainable, that coach needs to come from within that community. So those kids trust that coach. That coach knows what those kids are going through day in and day out, whether it's good or bad. They know their own situations. They can trust them. And that's for any community for that matter. But that is how sustainable programming happens. So part of our long-range plan in terms of growth is not just getting a stick in a kid's hands. It's actually recruiting and training coaches, because coaches are the ones that can sustain that within that community. And that coach can then understand how to fundraise, how to make it a viable financial model. We can help them do that. So that's a lot of words. You got to implement that at scale. And we're close. We're certainly not there in terms of some of the implementation, but that's a pathway to solve that, or at least start to address that community problem. And by the way, the club is an active participant in that community solution.
Let me try using a couple of words to tie what you're saying. You talked about pay to play. So what I heard from you was how to pay less to play, which will allow more people to get involved. And when you talked about the connection of more players playing, those are more customers for the club aside from just playing. I just wanted to throw that in as sort of what I think I heard.
That's correct. That's correct.
I want to hit on one more topic before I throw it over to Bob, and that is women's lacrosse. It's getting quite big. It's quite popular. We have some great athletes both in Canada and the U.S. A couple of things. One is ideas on how to grow it further, and the other one is what's your idea for women after college? We've got one that started up, which is Lacrosse Unlimited, and they're starting to take shape out in the U.S. But I'm just curious about your thoughts about this.
So women's actually has been growing at a faster clip in the U.S. than men's, for various reasons that are driving that. One, there are more women's collegiate programs because of the gender equity laws of Title IX here in the U.S. That when you have, some of the schools that have football teams, that skews more male participation, which then opens the door to having more women's teams to offset the number, just headcount, the number of men's athletes at that university. Unfortunately, the side effect of that, there's not as many Division I and 2 or 3 men's programs as we would like. With that said, women's sport is having its moment, certainly globally, but here in the U.S., we see continued growth of the girls' game in particular. Athletes Unlimited, which is the women's league, which has multiple sports, basketball, softball, baseball, and lacrosse. We are partners with. We work very closely with them. In fact, they play their season starting last year. They played their season here at USA Lacrosse at our headquarters. And so I do think there is a very strong pathway to the women's pro sport through Athletes Unlimited. Where there's a gap is that if you look at the male athlete right now, ultimately having a year-round full-time male pro athlete is the objective. And that's starting to happen between NLL and PLL as examples. In the women's game, for lacrosse, there's only one outlet, which is the field women's game through Athletes Unlimited, and that's roughly a 5 to 7 week season in the summertime. There's not another alternative. The World Lacrosse World Championships for box will be held next fall. Location's not public yet, but it'll be next fall, 2024. And that has traditionally been a men's. It is now a men's and women's. There will be a women's world championship in box next fall. And so I'm curious where that will go, but that will start to tee up, is there a market for, say, a box women's league? And again, I don't know the answer to that, but having a world championship starts to legitimize that discipline for women.
Bob, let's throw it over
Marc,
to you for
I've got a couple of things to run by, but first of all, on the world stage, you're going to be having the U.S. as exposed at least 3 times. We hope 3. So we got the World Lacrosse next summer, this coming summer, in San Diego. You got next year the World Box in Syracuse, and then the Olympics. With our fingers crossed that we'll have a team in there. So how is USA Lacrosse going to handle being the host of all those events? Because even the Olympics will be here.
So the World Championships for the women in Towson, we ran that as the local organizing committee, we being USA Lacrosse.
Right.
So in other words, the way that deal was structured, and that was before I got here, deal structure. And what that means basically was we're the operator. We take the financial risk, operational risk. The World Championships in San Diego, we are not the local organizing committee. We're the third party that is the local organizing committee. We are the host nation. We're very closely involved, but we operationally as a governing body are not running the event. The local organizing group is, which is the model for many world championships and many major sporting events, that the host nation, host governing body is basically the managing partner, for lack of a better way of saying it, and an agency or a local organizing group will run the operation. So that is happening for the box championships as well. And then certainly the Olympics will be run by LA 28. And in between that time frame, there will be a championship might throw our hat or bid on. And under that premise, we would not operationally run it like we did this past summer in Towson. And the reason why is running a multi-sport, multi-team event is a heavy lift. And to your point where you're going with this, Bob, like that's a big lift. And that takes away from our mandate and our mission. And so it's better to work with a local organizing group. So that will be the model moving forward, because just operationally, financially, that would be tough. With that said, it represents a great opportunity to showcase the game, showcase USA Lacrosse, everything we do from youth development, sports, science, safety, as well as our national teams, national team development. So they are great storefronts and great platforms that we're pretty excited about, very fortunate to have. Now, there'll be a lot of other world events that are going to happen in other parts of the world. The women's under 20 championships in 24 will be in Hong Kong, China, which will be interesting. It's important to the global growth. Mark my words, Japan is the next great nation in this sport. I'm sure there'll be a championship of some kind that ends up in Japan as the host nation. So
we just sent a delegation over there. We just sent a delegation over there to work with them. But the perception, no matter how the partnerships goes, and I've worked with that before too, is that USA Lacrosse is going to be the main sign. Everybody's going to think that USA Lacrosse is the mainstay for all these events because you're going to be the most visible out there. So it is a great platform for you guys to show your case. In our meeting at the office, you mentioned something to me, and I've been thinking about it. I know you've been working on it, and that is, what does USA Lacrosse want to be in the long run? And your last editorial, you mentioned curiosity, where you don't mind going around and embarrassing people in the office by asking them candid questions. But it's the only way to get the type of answers you want, because these people have hands-on every day, plus outside. So have you made any more plans about what US Lacrosse, you have so many programs, what's to be?
Well, the first thing I'll say, one of the things that I did when I got here was try to ensure we're focused. And what I mean by that is, if you ask people around the organization or you ask people outside, like, what do we do? You'd get different answers. And those answers would be skewed towards their area of responsibility. And the answers weren't wrong. It was just geared towards their areas of responsibility. And that is very normal for a lot of organizations. The challenge with us is that, and any organization for that matter, is that when you ask people what we do, but also why we do it, the answer should be consistent. And so when you talk about, what do we do? What do we want to be when we grow up kind of a thing, is that I have taken the approach of our mission and said, here's what we do. And every one of my talks, whether it's with private donors to the staff in these environments, is I make sure that I communicate our mission. And our mission is 11 words, 3 objectives: fuel the growth, enrich the experience, field the best national teams. So we fuel the growth, get sticks in kids' hands, enrich the experience. We make sure they stay in their hands with coach training, sports science and safety, official recruitment and training. And then field the best national teams. That's the unique responsibility of governing body. Yeah. And so base of the pyramid with growth and sticks in hands, tip of the pyramid in high performance. But the other thing that I really focus on is, why do we do it? Why do any of us do what we do in these organizations? And the reality is we do it because lacrosse changes lives. Hard stop. Every one of us has had our life profoundly changed because of this game. And that's what we do. And whether that is you got into a college, but more realistically, it is you made lifelong friends. You learned leadership. You learned to deal with adversity. You had fun, right? You're more physically or mentally fit than before, right? All these other life lessons about how your life changed because of this game is why we do what we do. So we focus on those areas. Now you've got to make that actionable. So this is why I've focused so much on youth participation, because it is the common ground for all of us. And that I'm in the process now of putting the final touches on a long-range plan, as I referenced earlier, that will put a stake in the ground on growth. And I've been spending time with other key property stakeholders at the pro level, at the collegiate level, to elicit their support and participation in this. And we're about a month and a half away from kind of rolling this out, but everybody's in. Everybody.
Sorry, I apologize. Throw in sense of community as well. That's really important in lacrosse. We've learned that with all the guests that we've had. That sense of community is really important too.
Couldn't agree with you more. Sense of community, belonging, infrastructure around you. You might not have a great home life for whatever reason, but lacrosse provides an infrastructure that gives you support you didn't have, as an example, right? And so that's why this game is so important, and that's why we do what we do. Is absolutely life changing. And everybody, like when I tell people that, they're like, oh yeah, they think about their own experiences. It makes it very personal, and very clear. There's clarity to that, and it's been effective, and people have responded to it. And so that's our focus, and that's why I constantly go back to growth, experience, national teams, which is in our mission, and that work was done before I got here. But it's really honing in on that focus, combined with actionable steps to do that. And that is about working together and specific platforms, which does mean we might do less of other things that we were doing before. And it's not because it's not important. It's not because it is not focused on those specific mission objectives. And that's been the hard part, is getting people to look at programs and say, why are we doing this? Does it ladder up to those missions? Because if it does not, then either A, we shouldn't be doing it, or we need to transition it to someone else to do it.
Well, in personal experience, I've looked at, when I was traveling for the foundation, I would put a little lacrosse stick on my suitcase. I think I even told you that. And every airport that I went into, whether it was San Diego, whether it was San Francisco, Milwaukee, I had at least 1 or 2 people come up to me in the airport and say, I played here, or I remember that, or I lived back east back when I was there. Never went to an airport without that happening. And in my experience also, football, basketball, your loyalty is to your team and your college. In lacrosse, it's an open sorority and fraternity. It can be anywhere. It doesn't matter where you played or how much you played. It's the fact that everybody in lacrosse and the connections, as you well know, the mentorships have gotten a lot of people very successful careers just because of this game. And I don't know what you all are going to do about mentorship for that, but it certainly should be something that is in your programs. Is that mentorship type of thing in your programs, or you leave it up to the schools?
Actually, we've got a plan, and not a plan. It's a bit of an idea and a rollout of a community network through technology platform for potentially former national team players. Start there. It's like, because it's a smaller group of people that we can work with in developing basically a community platform specifically for them, right? And that could be everything from jobs and networking to, hey, I need a knee replacement. Who's a good doctor? Like, it could be as simple as that, but it's part of that community. Or like could be as simple as like, I want to start a program in my area. Do you know anybody who can help coach, type of thing? Well, the plan is to start with that and then widen it to the wider lacrosse community after we get that kind of platform, in a place that we think is pretty, valuable, and then widen it to the larger lacrosse network. But yeah, community membership is a key part of that. How do we incorporate USA Lacrosse membership into that community experience?
How about the chapters? How much a role? I know some of the chapters were disbanded and have kind of formed their own group, like the one in Baltimore. How valuable are the chapters, and what do you foresee in their role in your growth?
Yeah, the regionality of what we do matters a great deal. We cannot affect material change from sitting here in our headquarters in Baltimore. We're a national organization. And so prior to me coming here, right, you reference the model changed a bit where chapters shifted to focus on local fundraising and Hall of Fame activity in their specific market to support initiatives within that market. USA Lacrosse added, right now we have 11 folks. We'll add another one rather shortly, people within the regions of the United States. We have 11 people that work throughout the U.S. from Seattle up to Boston, down to Texas, Atlanta, etc. And we break up the U.S. into regions. And, excuse me. And those individuals work with all the programs in that region for growth and program management. And so the chapters have been very helpful in terms of local fundraising and local support. And I'll use Long Island Metro chapter as an example. We've worked with them very closely over the last 2 years to get lacrosse sticks into, for example, Brentwood High School, which is a community in need. This past year, Brentwood was for a girls program. This past year for Sewanaka High School, which was in need as a boys program. So we will work with the local chapters on everything from a bit of, Hall of Fame to local contributions and fundraising.
Okay. Corporate sponsorship, Mark. I know going way back, we had the first World Games in '82 at Hopkins. We had a very nasty competition between Bryan and STX. I don't know if the story ever got to you. I'll be happy to explain it to you someday. Corporate sponsors tend to come in, and you are looking for corporate partners. Am I correct? And
yes, we are.
Okay. How much control are they going to have if they're putting in, like for the world team or your youth leagues? How much control are they going to have for their sponsorship? Because that's what they want. You know it as well as I do. So how are you going to handle that?
So corporate sponsorship is a great opportunity. Quite frankly, this is my sweet spot. I've been dealing in the corporate sponsor world the last 20, 25 years. And so corporate partners are looking for, the whole key is how you connect a corporate partner, whatever that problem or business objective of that corporate partner is, connect it to connect that problem to you as a sponsorship entity in terms of what solution you're providing. So corporate partners, they're not the tail that wags the dog. The property is sacred, and the property is the priority, but the property needs to have value to that sponsor. It needs to provide solutions to that sponsor. In today's environment, it's very much focused on digital and storytelling and engagement and audience building. And so there's a great opportunity to do that because there's a lot of great stories around lacrosse. But the corporate partnership world is much more competitive with PLL, NLL, NCAA, lacrosse doing very well, Athletes Unlimited. There's just a lot more options if you want to speak to the lacrosse audience than existed even 5 years ago. And so our goal is certainly to work with the endemic partners of the STXs and Warriors, if you would, Cascade Mavericks of the world. But our responsibility is really to speak to new audiences. And that is speaking to autos and telcos and IT companies and the great audience that lacrosse has, and bringing those folks to the table as well. And that's our pathway to growth. But it needs to be, you need to have a plan. It needs to be a cadence that is year round. You cannot do one-time events. Sponsors don't generally buy into that anymore. And so how you build year-round programming and engagement with your fans and connect that back to the partnership is the work that we're doing now.
That's great. And I feel that if you get a team into the Olympics, it's going to open up doors for non-traditional sponsors from everywhere. I mean, do you agree with that?
Yes, it does, because it gives you an opportunity to speak to new audiences. And that's core to our growth, but that's core to being relevant as a sports and entertainment property, is that you've got your core fan base. Everybody knows that. Like lacrosse has its core fan base. But what can differentiate you in terms of sponsorship and growth is how do you attract the casual fan? Will someone flipping through a channel see a stream of a game and stop and watch? Will someone go to an interesting lacrosse game event experience because I might not be a fan, my friends are a fan, they're bringing me along, but it's going to be fun. That's how you grow. And that's how sponsors come along for the ride.
Yeah. How about TV exposure? Is USA going to be involved with more TV exposure for the game? The collegiate game kind of has a control, but world teams, things like that. Is that something you're negotiating?
Yeah, well, the World Lacrosse World Championships are actually a World Lacrosse asset, so they negotiate those deals.
Right.
We've got a pretty good line of sight on that, which has been great, and that's a credit to World Lacrosse on that. But yes, we would like to see more men's, women's national team competitions in an environment where people can watch it, whether linear TV or some form of streaming. That is something that we are working on. I do think that international competition, whether with Canada, Haudenosaunee, Puerto Rico, other nations, is going to be part of that mix. But it is an important aspect of promoting our national teams and our national team athletes.
You mentioned Haudenosaunee. They've had their problems over the years in terms of international competition. And they were welcomed in the sixes because Ireland dropped out. And of course, there's a long history between those two nationalities. Are you all working with them to try to make sure that if we get a team in the Olympics or an Olympic sport, that they will be invited?
So that is a World Lacrosse responsibility. Meaning that the International Federation drives our potential inclusion into the LA 28 Olympics. And World Lacrosse is working with LA 28 on what that might look like. So I certainly would defer to them. With that said, we fully, meaning USA Lacrosse, fully support Haudenosaunee participation. I don't want to speak on behalf of Lacrosse Canada, but I'm pretty confident they have the same point of view on that. And so certainly World Lacrosse is taking the lead on that, working directly with the Haudenosaunee as well, right, in that endeavor.
All right, gentlemen, we're out. I apologize, Bob. I'd love to do this again. We've run past our hour and we're running into the next show. So I apologize for having to stop right there. There's so much more we could talk about.
Marc, thank you. Thanks for your time and participation. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
For both of you.
Yeah.
For both of you, thank you.
Yes, thanks to all, everybody here. It was fantastic. I really appreciated your contribution. So thank you, Gary, Bob, and Mark, for doing this. For Bob Tearing, coach of Loyola High School, and Marc Riccio, CEO of USA Lacrosse. I'm Candid Stanisci. Thank you for watching Lacrosse Talk, seen live Thursdays at 4 p.m. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Network. For Lacrosse Talk, news, entertainment, and other sports programming we offer, please check out spanglishworld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. And of course, you can always follow the shows that I do here on, of course, YouTube, Candid Stanisci 1030. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next Thursday.
Thanks for having us.